Welcome to the book cover design webinar. My name is Miki, and I'm an illustrator and graphic designer, and I'm also the illustration community manager at Pixabay. I'm thrilled to have you all here with us. And joining me today is a very talented creative. Her name is Joanne. I'm giving the floor to her to introduce herself.
Hi everyone. My name's Joanne. I'm a freelance book cover designer, currently freelancing for my local indie publisher. And yeah.
We mentioned Pixabay a couple of times already since the start of the session, but what is Pixabay? Pixabay is all about connection, exposure, and inspiration for creatives. Pixabay is a community of artists sharing their work with a global audience, giving and receiving feedback, upskilling with free educational blogs, workshops, and webinars like this one, and taking part in events and contests. As an artist, you can also set up your profile to receive donations or indicate that you're available for hire. For those who aren't already on Pixabay, we invite you to check out how you can use our diverse range of media to enhance your own creative practice, find collaborators, or build a portfolio and contribute with your own work. Please reach out to me if you'd like any support getting your new profile set up. I'm always here to help. And if you've been around on Pixabay for a little while and looking to boost your exposure, or just improve your creations in general, feel free to chat me too. We love supporting Pixabay artists on their journey, whether it's profile setup, content tips, or feedback, or featuring artists on our social media channels, blog, or website. We're always happy to help. Looking forward to seeing you all on Pixabay. For today's webinar, we will have a little warm-up activity, an introduction to what book cover is, a step-by-step guide on the design process, where Joanne will share her own process and some of her case studies. And then we will also provide some lessons on important design elements and some tips and information on print finishes. Great. To start off, we'll be playing a little game about book covers. The title is What's the Genre? The rules are pretty simple. I will show you a book cover, and you'll guess the genre of the book based on what you see on the cover. There will be choices, so just type your answers in the chat box. Okay. First, we have Emily Henry's People We Meet on Vacation. Is it a women's fiction, romantasy, contemporary romance, or self-help nonfiction? Just type your answers in the chat box. Okay, so the answer is C, contemporary romance. I get why some people chose A, but to be more specific, it is a contemporary romance. Second, we have Caitlin Dowdy's Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs? Is this a satirical fiction, young adult fiction, nonfiction, or a comic? I see a lot of A's, some B's. Okay, so the answer is C. It is a nonfiction. So Caitlin is an author and a mortician. So this book answers like real questions from kids about death, dead bodies, and decomposition. So the book tells us what happens to our bodies when we die. So very catchy title, cute cover. But yeah, it is C, nonfiction. Next, we have Rachel Greenlaw's The Ordeals. Is it a romantasy, urban fantasy, cozy crime, or horror? The answers vary for this one. Like I see different answers. Uh Mostly B, I guess. But the answer here is A. It is a Roman fantasy, romantasy. Next, we have Sally Gardner's The Weather Woman. Is this a literary fiction, historical fiction, fantasy, or mystery? I see a lot of B's, and that is the correct answer. It is a historical fiction. Finally, we have Stephen Graham Jones's The Buffalo Hunter Hunter. Is it a memoir, noir fiction, A psychological thriller or horror? Ooh, lots of C's. Okay, so this one is D, horror. Thank you so much for participating in our little game. As seen during the activity, each of us instinctively linked the book covers to a particular genre, whether our guesses were accurate or not. This highlights how we all carry preconceived ideas about what a book should look like based on its genre, which is largely shaped by current publishing trends. So here's a quick showcase of some of the cover design trends based on the top genres in the market. For romance, flat vectors are commonly seen in romantic comedies, and then ornate typography and like deep tones for romantasy. For science fiction, illustrations of settings like futuristic cities or spaceships are pretty common. Some are minimal with clean typography, while tech related books have those glitching effects and like the codes. And then for business or self help books, we usually have large, bold titles, which has a promise or like a statement. These are pretty common. They usually have minimal, bright, solid background. So these are just some of the current trends in genres. Obviously, there are a lot more genres with their own trends, which we will all learn today. Joanne will now dive deeper into why these trends are important in designing a book cover.
Hello, everyone. Okay, so I guess we'll start at the most basic question. What is a book cover and what it does? So the simple answer would be that a book cover keeps everything together, so holds the pages in and keeps them from being damaged. But a more modern answer would be that a cover is an important marketing tool that draws in potential readers and specific target audiences to a book. So, because of this, buyers should be able to tell from a book's cover what the general genre is through key visuals and tone alone, which we could sort of tell from the exercise we did earlier. So, on to the next slide, we can see that social media has created more visual impact through book cover design. So with books being seen more online, book covers have to be able to be visually noticeable. So the titles have to be noticeable and like or the visuals. So from these examples from book announcements specifically, we could tell that some book cover designs, motifs and specific aspects are used to help create a more visual impact when drawing in potential readers. And these can be helped to promote books to a wider audiences with the marketing aspects. And similarly, we see some designers who have started showing their design processes. So that also helps with book designs and like the covers in general. Uh, with all this in mind, we can start with the design process and starting with it. So we usually are delivered a brief, which is gives the designer everything, all the information they need to know in order to decide what goes on the cover. So for from a publisher, for example, a brief could include all the text for the cover, a blurb of some kind describing the story, competition titles, and details such as target audience and retailers. And some of the important questions that need to be considered are who are the target audience, what are the competition titles, and these are important factors to make sure your book fits into the current market and to make sure it also stands out. So generally, for market research, you will come across cover trends, as already stated, that help people familiarize themselves with specific genres. But within each genre, there's also subgenres under them, which also contain their own distinct visual language and trend that helps set them apart from each other. So, for example, we have the umbrella term for crime. So, on the top left, we have cozy crime, which is very different from the psychological thriller side. So the First Day Murder Club helped the design trend basically of the subgenre becoming synonymous with these kind of simple color palettes and some hand lettering and handwritten fonts for like that personal effect. And then we have some like small stock images to help with illustrate the kind of quaint settings. So these reflect the low stakes of the books in the plot and focus on the community settings while also sleuthing on the side. And then we can see from the psychological thriller, it's quite different in contrast with like the colors immediately and how these colors are quite neon almost. They set a darker tone. The text is quite fairly simple, but typically you'd find these covers on Amazon, so it makes sense. So you can be able to read the titles easily from a small screen. There's like a sense of foreboding and tension from like the saturated color schemes. And yeah, it drives home the thriller aspect, which we do not see from the cozy crime scene. Uh, then next up, we have fantasy. So fantasy is quite interesting as it's becoming a very mainstream genre with like the rise of romantasy and cozy fantasy. But typically, fantasy as a whole has a very similar formula where there's an illustrated cover style, and depending on the subgenre, for example, epic fantasy typically has detailed, realistic landscape illustrations. And yeah, that to depict the action of like some of the books. To, for example, as we see here from cozy fantasy, which is more cozy than today. So from the top left examples, these are generally recent books that came out in the fantasy genre. They all have the interesting design choice of having the text slow down, which gives an unobstructed focus onto the illustrations behind, which I find quite interesting. It almost gives creates an impression of looking into like the world within the books. And it feels kind of like an opening scene where, especially with Netto and Idlefire, where we see the text first and then the illustrations just come out in the background. There's also some flourishes where we see Idlefire with the text, specifically with the letter R. It creates like some like fantasy, it creates like a fantasy feel to it. Uh, and then kind of in a similar sense with cozy fantasy, there's the illustrated look, but we see more soft hues and the classic simple composition. We also see like elegant fonts, though this is different with the Violet Visselwart's book, where we see the typical sans serif typeface to hint at the more contemporary setting. Uh, from here, we also see some illustrated border designs, which is quite telling from the cozy fantasy genre, and the illustration styles are generally more relaxed and like less detailed than general fantasy books, which highlights the low stakes of the story in its setting. And then finally, we come on to the broad genre of literary fiction. Um, so sometimes we see influences outside of publishing that soon go on to become popular design trends, and this is quite apparent with the Brat Summer trend back in 2024. So with the neon lime green color, we see this become apparent in mostly the title fonts and author names for literary genre that focus on a woman's perspective, for example, feminine rage and breaking free from the standard expectation from women. So this is quite interesting choice as it can link back to the themes of what the album Brat entails, where is a deliberate choice that defies expectations on what should be seen on like an album cover from a female artist, and now it's translated to a book cover from the female perspective. So the bold lime green is like an immediate visual hook on these covers, so we can see them immediately, and then they typically are on top of traditional older paintings, which creates that like interesting contrast. And in the same genre of literary fiction, we also see the trend of animals used from old paintings. And again, this is once again depicting the women in these books as like animals almost, and showing their lack of autonomy in these stories. Again, they're usually seen with a bold modern type. in contrast with the image in the background. And this is also quite a neat draw to make potential readers question the meaning of the image in context with the story. So, with an understanding of these kind of different genres, we can start with basically the cover studies. So, this first case study of mine is a Gothic Romantasy cover I did quite recently. It focuses heavily on illustration, so this is just my process through it. So, I was given a mood board of competition titles from the client. So these three covers on the side were some of the uh, covers from the selection. And basically, they wanted a mood from typically seen from a Gothic Romantasy, which is like, I suppose, like purple colors, some border illustrations, and a sense of like some kind of dark fantasy as setting. So alongside that, I did my own research into the Gothic genre. The client mentioned wanting something more natural, so I was looking at how to incorporate some plants and like potentially trees into the books, and I came across this edition for Wuthering Heights, which I felt matched the mood of like the scenery related background. So with that in mind, I went on to do my first rough sketches for what could go in the book. So with the research in mind, I basically ended up scribbling some designs which could typically found in the romantasy genre, for example, the border designs, and even adding in some items and objects that were typically found in the genre, while also relating back to the story that the client has. And then we can see I did some filigree designs and just some sense of basically illustrations of like how things would go on the cover. And then from there, we go on to our first iterations directly from the sketches. So basically plotting in shapes and ideas more concrete. So the client has a sense of what the visuals could potentially look like. Color wasn't necessary at this stage, but I chose a dark purple to let the client see what the potential vision could look like. And then we ended up choosing the far right option, which was the tree in the end. So with this decided, there was more detailed revisions based off of the selected cover. So it was mostly just playing around with color and correcting some details that the client wanted to change. So, for example, some items which could be found from the story, she wanted them to be more specific. So I added those, and then from there, I added in the spine design and background, which the client wanted to feel like almost one seamless drawing. So it was interesting trying to weave the front cover in with the rest of the cover. And from there, we came to the final book, which basically added in more details and like creating more depth of the book to make it uh, less 2D as the style was very vector image. So yeah, and then we come on to our second case study, which is a psychological thriller. This book is quite different from the illustrated cover, as for this cover, I just had to focus on a text and a simple image that would encompass the tone of this genre. So the client ended up referring multiple style references for his book that he wanted. Um, and he chose these specifically based on the minimalist, simple look. So, like, very clearly, we can read the title and like his author name. And they wanted the focus to be more on the image than anything else. So, from that style reference came the mood board of images, which we can see on the next page. So the client was quite interested in art history, so we ended up basically finding some images of like Icarus and basically images depicting like man's fall from grace and stuff like that. He was also interested in like the Japanese oni masks, which were relevant for his book's theme based on the character's broken psyche throughout the story. But with that being said, there was time to move on to the rest of the design process. So with some of these images used mostly from public domain, I played around with some of the composition, trying to keep it quite simple and clean. Also playing around with like negative space, so to create that like dramatic contrast between the image and the text. It was kind of difficult being a psychological thriller because you have to walk the line between not making it too horror and like keeping it onto the thriller aspect. So there was that aspect. And then to keep it more simple, he ended up choosing one of the paintings, which he ended up quite liking. Uh, because he felt that it suited the themes of the character in the book. So we went with that. And then after some editing of the image and like some simple color edits to make it pop out with like the red text, the final image is on the right. So next up is basically a quick recap of some design elements that could be found on like cover design. So first up, we have composition and hierarchy. So composition hierarchy are quite important because they basically guide the viewer's eyes on like where to read, basically how to read the title, basically. So for example, the Starry and Restless cover, this is a more simple example to showcase the title being at the top, a subtitle being in the center, and then the author's name being at the bottom with the illustration in the background. And similarly, the same could be said for Lauren Groff's book, Brawler, but this case, Lauren Groff has her name's been highlighted in pink, so you tend to read that first. So that gives off the impression that the author's name would probably grab potential readers more than the book's title. And then similarly could be said for swimming lessons, though the title has been split from the top and bottom, and the illustration helps dictate where the rest of the text goes. So with this in mind, once we understand the basics, we could tread the line between legibility and aesthetic fun. So you can shake up the rules a bit by placing the text in like very interesting composition. So yeah, it's almost like a piece of art. So yeah, these are some examples, especially with the titles and bold colors. But yeah, uh, next up we have colors, which are so these examples are more on the simple side, but they help evoke like some emotions and meanings to the book cover. So even though they're monocolors and they have just a simple black and white text, it's quite simple and effective in making you focus on the cover as a whole and drawing out like a potential emotion. But also going back to hierarchy, the color also helps with reading the title first. For example, they call this exceptional. So like you see the title and then you read like as follows. So yeah, it also helps between contrasting between the illustration and the text. So it makes it readable, especially from if you're looking from a small screen. Uh, and then next up is typography. So these ones are quite fun examples as typically seen fonts, like depending on the font you choose, it helps set the overall tone of the book. So for Oddbody, we can see that the text is quite modern and like funky, and it kind of matches the red ribbon illustration, which is quite a nice link to the text. So it brings the whole book cover together. And then for Bad Nature, we can see that is a more sketchy illustration. So that is reflected in the text, which I believe is hand lettering. So it makes it feel more cohesive and sketchy, which is quite nice. But at the same time, we're also ensuring the hierarchy is there. So Bad Nature is at the top and it's quite big. And then it goes down to the author's name and then some text, which gets so on so on. And then another instance is when the typography helps become the actual main vocal piece itself. So it's almost the visual and art piece. So like for hysterical, we can see it's been manipulated and it's the main vocal piece. And then similarly with hierarchy, we can see the author name and then the rest of the subtitles included on the side.
So aside from your choice of colors and use of typography, your chosen imagery is also very important. Most covers make use of photographs, illustrations, or a combination of both. Each has its own impact on how the book is perceived. Photography it usually conveys realism, so we can see it being used in like memoirs and biographies. But illustration, on the other hand, offer more creative freedom. And it can also depend, I guess, on the art style. If it's more, let's say, whimsical, it could be associated with fantasy or children's book. Using symbols or imagery that reflects a book's central theme is another great design approach. Symbolism allows a cover to communicate meaning in a subtle way. In the example here, the designers chose a single symbolic image and made it the focal point of the composition. Family Meal, a work of literary fiction with queer themes, features two forks. Next to it, Witness is a collection of short urban fiction stories, which is centered on human connection and community. And the designer used fingerprints as its key image. So it creates a visual impact while reinforcing the core message of the story. Whether it's photos or illustrations you need, Pixabay offers both. We have a free, diverse library of stock media that is all high quality and royalty free. This means you can use these in your book covers or when creating your mood boards and finding inspirations.
Last up, we have print finishes, which are typically considered once the design has been completely finished. So for some standard finishes from the typical cover, we have um, some covers like gloss and the opposite of like matte, and they help add a tactile and premium theme to like a book cover. So I'm not quite sure if that gloss cover can be seen quite well. So I have an example of, yeah, one that's gloss. So this has like a glossy look to it. And then on a similar note, we have foil on the cover. So we typically gold foil has been seen quite a lot, and that's usually seen on the title text and potentially adding some highlighting some specific parts of the imagery in the book cover. So we can see that from Dracula and Daughters. And then I also have an example of a silver foil one, which matches with the color scheme of this specific book, which is more darker. Uh, and then from some examples, we can see a combination of two finishes. So We Solve Murders, there's on the title, there's Spot UV, which gives it that shiny, glossy look, and then also Emboss, which helps uplift the text more so there's a more 3D, like tactile feel. And then found generally on the inside of like a book's cover, we have something called end papers. And typically they've been just repeated patterns, but we've been seeing a lot more, for example, like maps and like character art inside, which gives it a nice like personal feel and adds more detail into like the world than from inside the stories. And then coming off from the standard finishes, we have uh, the rising popularity of special editions. So on the next slide, we can see some more detailed and more aesthetic finishes on these finishes. So, for example, we have the broken binding editions, which are known for having the sprayed edge, which is basically coloring the pages on the outside, gives it that nice visual look. And at the same time, underneath, especially from like hardback versions, on the hardback, we have detailed foil patterns, typically that reflect basically the cover design from the front. So we can see from Crucible of Chaos, it almost copies the design from the front of the book while making sure it's able to be readable through the gold foil. And then another example of this is like a Spot UV version with the Reaper illustration. And this time it has Spot UV and deboss effect to create that like premium feel. And then another example would be Waterstones editions books, where we typically see sprayed edges with pattern designs that copy or that reflect the cover design. And then, yeah, this is cases for Gallant where the hardback foil design reflects the front cover. And then here we see they choose to use a red foil, which ties everything in together. I also have another example of like a special edition where we can see there's just cover art for the board of the image. So stuff like that. And then there's just an illustration inside. And yeah, so these help create like a more exclusive cover feel than your typical standard editions while raising up the detailed aesthetic finishes.
We published a blog about designing a book cover over on Pixabay. So this is like a summarized visual step-by-step guide with more cover design processes by other designers and a lot more additional cover references that you can look through and read. Um, we also have a forum page on Pixabay. One important step of designing a book cover is hearing feedback. And our forum is a nice place to seek feedback and opinions from fellow designers. Here are the next steps in your creative career. Remember to reach out to me if you'd like to get set up with an account on Pixabay and need some support to optimize your profile or uploads. And of course, if you're already in our community and looking for extra exposure, we also encourage you to upload your illustrations on Pixabay to help other creatives. Thank you, Joanne, for imparting your knowledge and expertise to us. Follow Joanne on all socials and see more of her work on her portfolio. Thank you so much for joining us in this webinar. We hope you learned a lot. We'll be uploading this session to YouTube so you can rewatch it or share it with your friends. We will email the link to you in a week. Make sure you follow Pixabay on social media, sign up to our newsletter, or follow us on Eventbrite to hear all the upcoming events and workshops we have planned. That's all for today. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you next time.